If you're an investor and you're wondering where could possibly be the next bottleneck that might pop off, this has been the year of memory. What is the next one? That's exactly the kind of conversation we're going to be having today.
Hey Alex, how you doing?
Hey, James, doing good. How about you?
Doing great as well. You ready to talk stocks some more?
Yes, and today we're going to be kicking off kind of a little mini series that we're going to be doing around AI.
Yeah, so AI is not done yet, huh?
It's just about what's the next thing. Got to always be thinking ahead.
All right. Well, so tell me about what are we talking about as it relates to AI?
Yeah, so today we're going to be doing a tier list ranking on the bottlenecks of AI. So if you're an investor and you're wondering where could possibly be the next bottleneck that might pop off, this has been the year of memory. What is the next one? That's exactly the kind of conversation we're going to be having today.
Yeah, I think from my own personal awareness and growth of understanding the AI, it first started with the chips, Nvidia popping off and being super discussed in the market. Then you hear about all the RAM shortages and the issues in Korea. Um, And so that sounds like a great discussion for us. But what are you thinking about the tier ranking? How does that fit into the discussion?
Yeah, so we're to kick off today with the tier ranking that really goes over and ranks the bottlenecks. And then next week, we're going to be coming out with a video where we're going to be talking about within each of those bottlenecks, what are some of the companies that you really need to have on your radar? And we're going to dive into those a little bit. And then finally, we're going to wrap up the three-part series here with me picking my favorite stock in each of the bottlenecks from there. So people will want to be sure to subscribe to the channel so that way you don't miss any of those upcoming videos.
Yeah, that's awesome. And when you mean bottleneck, you mean the build out of all of the AI infrastructure and what is maybe being slowed or challenging, lacking resources, all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, that's exactly it. So, like when you hear about the news talking about AI, you generally are they only hearing about the very final layer, and that's software. So you're hearing about ChatGPT, Gemini, Anthropic. That is the very final piece. All of the other parts that come into the play are what we're going to be talking about, but that is just one layer of the whole AI stack from there.
All right, so AI build out, you obviously hear a lot about, the chips and the memory and those kinds of things as, orders are backed up for a year plus for Micron. Nvidia sales are going through the roof. What else is there in the AI build out? Maybe we could start with that overview of all of those potential bottleneck layers, if you will, and then deep dive it. Does that work?
So first, we've got memory. We have advanced chips slash accelerators. We've got cooling and thermal management, electrical infrastructure, AI software apps, networking and data movement, power and grid capacity, foundry slash semiconductor equipment, consumer AI devices, and then wrap up with data center build out and real estate.
All right. Well, I'm just going to pick randomly here from that list, and we could talk about it. So, first one, especially with all the Micron talk recently, let's talk about memory. What's your thoughts on the bottleneck or the layer of the AI build out around memory?
Memory has been one of those that I feel like it kind of came out of nowhere. And I mean, there's a couple of stocks in there like SanDisk and Micron that if you bought into those and had any substantial money, I mean, you could be maybe knocking on retirement, especially with like a SanDisk. It's kind of crazy to think that Nvidia was one of the original kind of life-changing stocks you could have been in within the last decade. I mean, those two are right there with it, and it's kind of crazy to see. But what's happened this year is we've seen that not only do I need chips, I also need memory to go along with those chips. And as the chips start getting faster, I need faster memory to go along with it. And then the other part of memory is where SanDisk plays is there is so much data going on with AI. I need somewhere to store all of this information. And that's where what used to be kind of a boring company like SanDisk has now become one of the hottest trades you could have possibly been in. So memory kind of came out of nowhere, but it's definitely been the key part for this year at least.
Yeah, and I know what you mean by nowhere in the sense that obviously anyone working in computers or in data flow and cloud based things understands all of those kind of critical pieces. But from an investor standpoint, it certainly felt like it came out of nowhere because it was all this talk about AMD and the GPU processing that's needed and all the demand there, of course Nvidia as well. And then all of a sudden, as people started thinking, okay, this could be transformational, not only to society, but for wealth generation, it's like people started looking closer at the whole build out in the workflow. And then you started hearing of these companies pop up like Micron or Samsung and all these other memory companies. So that was pretty wild. And you just wish you could be, 1 week or 2 weeks ahead of the market on some of these things, which can equate to almost generational wealth building just from getting in early. So I do understand what you mean.
Hopefully today we'll be identifying some of those. But that's exactly what we're trying to do today is what is the next thing? So there, if you have a computer background, people would have recognized memory is going to be a holdup at some
Hmm.
point. It's just that nobody really saw it coming like they did. And then the pricing power that they now have is the reason why the stocks have ran so much.
All right, so that's memory. What do you rank it as it relates to being a potential bottleneck in the AI build out as an opportunity to invest in?
So I have memory at A tier. I continue to think it's one of the better areas you could put your money. I think that the memory shortages are going to continue for the next few years. We've been hearing this in kind of the earnings. There will be a time when memory pulls back, but I don't think we're there yet. And especially since these couple past weeks, we've seen Micron and some of these other stocks really pull back. I think it's a pretty good opportunity to think about.
Yeah, and I wonder, I mean, with all the advent of new technology coming out, you hear about physical AI, robots, you hear about quantum computing, and whatever is going to be required to do that. Memory long term, it may be cyclical and rise and fall a little bit on demand, but I don't think it's going to go away either.
And that's the beauty with a lot of these bottlenecks that we're going to talk about is when AI eventually catches up, it's going to create other industries where these companies can also benefit from.
All right, that's awesome. Well, let's talk about the next potential bottleneck layer around chips.
Yeah, so this is the OG, if you will, of AI and where it all started. Nvidia, AMD, Broadcom, some of those massive chip makers, even Intel kind of getting in there as well. And this layer is obviously what really kickstarted the entire AI revolution, especially when you were early on with AMD and Nvidia. We watched those kind of companies go from they make chips and they're usually focused on, gaming performance to wow, these things can really start running AI applications. And then we saw all those stocks pop off. Nvidia continues to put up insane quarters, and we're hearing from all of these companies that they do not have enough supply still. So even though the chips have been on a massive run, there still has to be more runway left because we're starting to hear talk of, you know, trading compute for share of companies. This is something Nvidia is starting to do is like, look, we'll let you get some free compute to run in exchange for share of your company. So we're starting to see a little bit of toes being like, you know what, all this graphic, the GPU build out is going to be leading to I need somewhere to run my technology in my cloud on. And if you help me run that on the servers for cheaper, then you can have part of my company. It's kind of a new way of thinking about negotiating for businesses.
All right, so you mentioned Nvidia, but there's obviously other competitors seeing all the profit they're making. You got the Mag 7, some of those companies talking about making their own chips. You got new companies on the rise like Cerebras. But I wonder are we past the chip craze or the need? I know there's still demand, but as far as a bottleneck, did we miss that aspect of the build out?
It feels like the market has really kind of cooled off a little bit, especially on the GPU side. Nvidia has not been keeping up with the market this year. They've been kind of lagging. AMD and Broadcom, they've been okay. Broadcom not as much, but AMD has really benefited from having the CPU, like you mentioned, Cerberus. So like, there's some other types of chips that have been winning, but like the GPU focused ones people have kind of gotten over. And I think that's a perfect example of how the spotlight within AI will continue to move as we get further into the future. Right now, it's on memory. Before that, it was on all these chips. So, like, what is the next one that it's going to be? And that's the discussion we want to keep having.
Yeah, that's fair. So chips as a bottleneck layer, where do you tier rank it?
I have them at B tier. So, these are basically guaranteed businesses moving forward, but they are probably not going to have the explosive upside that some of the other names on this list are going to have because most of these have had multi-year runs at this point. So even though Nvidia has been lagging, it's been on a huge run overall, and that's something important to keep in mind.
Well, thanks for sharing. Next one is an interesting one is the cooling aspect and thermal management because as we all know, especially if you're running your computer at full capacity or capability, sometimes you hear the fan going, all those things. Tell us about this bottleneck layer.
Yeah, this one's kind of interesting to think about because when the chips took off, nobody was really thinking about cooling them and how much heat gets produced. Like you mentioned, like without those fans, your computer would just basically melt. And so there's certain companies that have like really specialized in liquid cooling in there. So I mean, Vertiv is probably the number one name that you hear kind of thrown around in there. Other names on the list are Train, Johnson Controls, some of these companies that are able to make cooling components from there. And as the data warehouses continue to get built, right along with the chips and the memory, each of those are going to need cooling components between that because there's so much heat that is going on between all of those. I mean, we've heard about China putting data centers in the ocean for cooling. I don't, and it's kind of hilarious to think about water plus electronics is usually a really bad thing. And it's funny to like literally just throw in the ocean, but cooling is a problem. And if there's heat, that ruins electronic components. So it ends up being if I spend a ton of money on my chips, I don't want to just burn through them. Like I need to protect them long term, and that's why cooling becomes a big part of everything.
Right. When you think of the build out, obviously you have the data center where all this is happening, but the people that own the data center are building that or the computer, they have all the different vendors that help them solve all of the unique problems, right? So this is one of them. We talked about the memory. Okay, you need memory, you need the chips, the GPUs. This is another component that they would have vendors building out that data center to, and that's around the cooling and thermal management. So that makes sense. That's interesting. Sometimes it's, when you think of all of this, you don't always think of those kind of picks and shovels, but totally makes sense.
Exactly, and I think that that's another just great point of what is the next thing, and why it's important to be aware of the next thing when it comes to what is the right bottleneck to be thinking about.
All right. So as it relates to cooling and thermal management within the bottleneck, what do you tier rank this layer?
I have this one at A tier as well, and this one's a little bit newer. A lot of the companies that I've mentioned in there, specifically Vertiv, have kind of been on a run. So we're not first in line to kind of jump on this train. But I do believe that we're very early in building out all these data warehouses and that these companies are going to continue to be very, very needed as we build towards the future.
In my mind, is this next one is very or related or close to it. You have the cooling and thermal management, but you need to power that, right? And bring power to all of those systems. And so we have that power electrical layer. Tell us about this bottleneck.
Yeah, electrical infrastructure sounds like one of the least exciting things that you could probably invest in, right? Or at least you would think, prior to AI. I mean, some of the companies that fall into this is like Eaton, Hubble, Siemens, Quanta Services, like companies that maybe you haven't even heard of, but you would be shocked how many components are used in just transferring energy around. So when I build my data warehouse, I've got my chips in there, I've got my memory, I'm cooling it at this point. I now need to get power to it. And these are the companies that make all of those components that connect everything and get the power to the warehouse. Again, something that we take for granted, but critical when I'm building out these data warehouses.
Yeah, and probably expensive, right? To all of the electrical costs. And so I think in part why Elon wants to go put it in space. Who knows? But expensive, costs a lot. You have vendors building it out, try to make it efficient. So it makes sense. It's part of the build out. What, as far as it relates to the bottleneck, what do you rank this one?
So this one is my first S tier. And the reason why I like this one specifically is this one's very easily overlooked because a lot of the companies that I mentioned there, this is not really like their like AI is not necessarily their specialty. Some of the other companies we've been talking about, they really are focused in AI. These infrastructure companies, they do other things really, really well, and they're much more of a stable growth. This has just allowed all these companies to have another explosive gear that is really good for their stock. Some of these have really strong dividends. So if I'm investing across AI, these stocks are probably not the ones that are going to go 3x, 10x on you, but they're going to be really stable, really strong growing with nice dividends on top of it. So that's the kind of investment that I like. A really safe stock, but that has a high ceiling. That's pretty rare to find, stuff like that.
So with electrical infrastructure, are we talking to like the power companies and things like that that provide power and wire in the data center?
Energy has two different components to it. I've got my energy producers, which we may or may not be talking about next or soon. And then I've got my electrical infrastructure that gets they basically get the power to the building. So think about electrical infrastructure as the components that get the power to the building and kind of distribute it throughout the building. So those are different sets of companies going on.
Okay, so they're related to the data center where AI is being processed, and they're helping manage all of that thermal or the power through that, but not necessarily the electric company level. That's a different layer.
Right, exactly. So like I've got my electrical company provider,
Right.
but then the components in my house are not necessarily made by the same company that's producing the power.
That
Exactly.
makes sense. All right, next one is AI software.
Yeah. So again, I think this is probably one of the most popular layers that you hear talked about, really outside of the chips. I think this is probably the most popular layer that you hear talked about. So this is the companies at the end, like when I'm interfacing with ChatGPT, that's the layer that we're talking about. And they're not public yet, but some of the other companies that fall into this, think Palantir, ServiceNow, Salesforce, Datadog, all of these companies that utilize AI, and then they put it in a consumer usable state, and then people use the AI built into the tool. So that's a layer that we're talking about here. And it's kind of like the final step of AI because we don't care about AI if I can't use it, right? We can have all these components that make it. This is the final layer that actually puts it in front of the user.
Yeah, this one's always interesting because this is where it likely touches the consumer, the first touch point, if you will, and what they get familiar with and use. So whether it's in the B2B world, like a Palantir, or to an end consumer using a Gemini chat app or Chat GPT. So that makes sense, and I can't help to think that pretty soon all software apps are going to have some layer or component of AI. You already see it on a marketing level where
Yeah.
everyone just wants to throw AI in there. Um, okay, well, that makes sense. Tell us what you rank as a potential bottleneck for AI software apps.
So I have AI software apps at C tier.
Mm,
So the reason why I have them at C tier is because we don't really know who's going to win yet. So when I'm putting money into these different companies, there's a lot of competition at this layer. And a lot of the companies that I talked about, specifically like stocks like ServiceNow, I mean, they're down huge this year. The software apocalypse has happened for a reason. This is for sure creating opportunities though in the right winners. And I find this layer to be a little bit more of a gamble at this point in time. So that's the reason I have it at the C tier. Having said that, some of these stocks are going to have way higher ceilings than some of those other previous stocks that I was talking about. Because if you do find the winner, those are the kind of stocks that can definitely 10x off of this because they are going to be able to make AI so profitable that they're going to be making so much money it's going to result in the stock going up.
yeah, I think of the software apocalypse and looking at, we recently did a video on the Mag 7. Encourage you guys to all check that out. But we talk about Microsoft and how their stock has been in a decline, and with maybe some missteps around Copilot and integrating AI there. Um, but you're right. It'll be interesting once everyone kind of figures it out who captures that end user and creates a business model that's affordable but beneficial, and then starts going, uh, going wild as far as, revenue and all those potential things. So could be exciting as well.
Yeah, and again, there are certain companies in here that I actually do like, and I'll be sharing those in the future part of these videos.
Awesome. Looking forward to it. All right. Next one is networking and data movement. When you make that API call, it's got to go through the network, go into the cloud, hit the cache layer, hit the servers, hit the databases, be processed, and come back. So, as a bottleneck, tell us about this one.
Yeah, this one is again one that I think is still relatively new, but a lot of the companies that fall into this have been on pretty good runs. So think of Arista Networks, Broadcom also plays in here, Marvell, that's been a name that's been really in there, Lumentum, Coherent. So this is all about getting the data transferred to other places. And this is where you start seeing photonics coming into play. And it's kind of insane the technology that we're getting into now of I'm able to transfer like data with light rather than having to use actual cables. So we've gotten so fast that we now need faster ways to move the data. So I could have an insane graphics card, an insane memory, but if the underlying cabling and connection pieces are not fast, it actually slows it down. And this is where this bottleneck has started to come into play. You're also seeing a lot of fiber optic cabling that's becoming really important because a lot of these old cables just cannot transfer speeds like you can with the fiber optic. So think about how much cabling we need and how important that is. That if we can't talk to anything, what is the point of any of this as well? So it kind of throws off a light bulb of, wow, this is kind of a crazy bottleneck area.
For this layer with the bottleneck, what tier ranking do you give?
I have this one as A tier as
Mm,
well. So again, we are not super early in the game, but I feel like we're pretty early in the game here. A lot of these companies that I mentioned are trading at pretty high PE. You heard Nvidia's CEO Jensen Huang. He kind of said, "Oh, Marvell is going to be the next $1 trillion stock." So the secret's a little bit out on these, but I truly believe in this being a really investable bottleneck based off everything I was telling you about that. I think that when you think of chips, they got so fast, I needed fast memory. And then the memory's gotten so fast, now I need fast connections. And I think this one could be one that we see really here very soon as the next thing.
awesome. Well, next one is power and grid capacity, related to obviously the electrical and thermal stuff, but a little bit more broader, external of the data warehouse. Is that right?
Yeah, so now we're at the actual power generators and like the people that build out the grid. So think of Constellation Energy, Vistra, Southern Company, AEP, Nextera Energy. We've mentioned some of these companies in the other videos, but these are the companies that will benefit because AI data centers use a ton of power to the point where we've seen certain states wanting to ban data centers because they're raising utility bills because they're using so much power. So who wins when the utility bill goes up? It's basically the utilities. And then the thinking here is as well, the other ways that you win are the companies more focused in renewable energy. So I don't want to go burning a bunch of like, fossil fuel stuff that is like ruining the planet just so that I can power data centers. We want a renewable source that's also consistent at providing the energy because we can't have glitches in the software if it's getting pulses of energy. It has to be a consistent stream that's being sent there. So that's how you kind of start seeing this bottleneck form there.
Yeah, you raised some good questions and insight to this area in the bottleneck. What could be a potential bottleneck is some of that AI backlash, right? That you're hearing, which may slow policy, state approvals, things like that, as people get concerned not only for power usage, but how it impacts your country at large. On occasion here where I live, sometimes you get these blackouts because of the heat and trying to balance it all. I'm sure people have concern. You throw a big data center and all of this electrical power demand in their neighborhood can create some issues. So, that being said, for this layer, what do you rank it?
This one I also have S tier.
Mm,
And so you can see it's right there with my other electrical components part. I truly believe in the power bottleneck as the main thing.
yeah.
Right now, like you said, just think about all the power needs we need with, everything warming up. We're hitting record temperatures. So utility companies are already doing well there. Add in these data centers and we're going to be strained. You mentioned that, there's a lot of politics involved. Something that's really good that China has is their power grid's insane.
Mm.
And they have so much more power capabilities than we do. So if the US starts feeling like we're going to be falling behind, I feel like the government is probably going to want to get really involved in driving this forward so that we don't get held up with data centers and we have enough power to go around. That's the part that I really believe in is that we need a massive amount of power and we need the components to get the power to the warehouses from there.
Yeah, and related to this, you're seeing small local based nuclear as an option, and some of that discussion getting more serious with companies that are innovating in that area too, just to help solve this problem of um, having enough power for everything and everyone.
Yeah, and I mean, there's other companies like Bloom Energy that are coming with like little modules that help data warehouses get up quicker. So we're gonna have a lot to talk about when it comes to power because everybody's getting really creative with how to speed these things up.
All right, so that's power and electrical grid. Next one is the foundry semiconductor development and build out.
Yeah, so this is basically the bottom layer of manufacturing. So this is where TSMC comes into play, ASML, Applied Materials, Lam Research. So these are the companies that are physically making things. ASML is the company that makes the machines that TSMC then uses to make the chips. So we're at that, picks and shovels layer. This layer is probably going to continue to be one of the most consistent ways that you can possibly invest, because if these other companies are saying their supplies are constrained, it's because these companies are constrained, meaning that they are maxed out. And as they become maxed out, they can continue to raise their prices. So this is probably one of the most safe layers that you can invest in when it comes to AI.
Yeah, this layer traditionally up into the AI build out timeline has been more of those steady eddy, give you a dividend, not a lot of growth type company and stocks. But here you find these companies entering into a season of growth. So it could be a good time to come in on and then land where they kind of balance out into a higher dividend, steady eddy stock.
Yeah, and that's what's been so funny to see is that, as the spotlight moves within AI, these companies still remain important. But the spotlight's never truly been on them. Like they've been beneficiaries along the way. I'd say some of their stocks have been some of the more consistent ones. But as memory came up, that's where we saw some of these memory producers really take off this year.
All right. So as it relates to these foundries and equipment companies, what do you rank it?
I have this layer at B tier, and it is still one of my favorite ways to invest within AI. It just doesn't have the upside that some of the other layers that I was talking about are. But if you're looking for kind of consistent businesses, this is a really good layer to look at.
I'm a fan of AMAT Applied Materials. Do you think that this bottleneck layer has more room to grow? Because there certainly has been a bit of a stock climb on a lot of these companies already.
I think that they are probably trading, at pretty high values right now, but they kind of deserve to be, because these are some of the most important companies on this list. All the layers after this layer would not exist or be needed without these guys. So these stocks will always trade at a premium because they are some of the most important ways to do it. And it's kind of nice because they pay dividends along the way. So you're seeing really substantial growth on top of having a nice dividend along with it.
Yeah, that makes sense. And yeah, I think it also relates to the fact that chips aren't going away even after the major AI build out is complete. New innovations, new products, physical AI, these companies will be along for that ride as well.
And that's what makes them great, is that they don't really care who wins. They just care that you choose them for their products.
All right. Next one is consumer AI devices.
Yeah, so this one is a little bit kind of early stages right now. I don't think we really have good answers here quite yet. So this is where companies like Apple come into play, Qualcomm, you got Dell and HP as kind of the computers. Nvidia released that there's going to be some, basically edge computing where we've got AI on your device. So think about kind of, I'm using a product that has AI capabilities on it. I think Apple's probably the one that stands out the most here, and they're kind of linked into Qualcomm because Qualcomm is going to be helping out with chips and stuff for phones and everything like that. But I haven't seen clear ways of how I'm really using AI in a different way. I can ask Siri or do things like that, but I've got ChatGPT and I've got these other things. So how are the devices going to be changing with AI? And that's where this layer really kind of needs to prove it for me.
Yeah, certainly early. And in fact, I remember even last year, maybe there were a few devices coming out that you would just wear. There was no screen. You just kind of clip it onto your shirt or hold it and you just talk into it. And then it hits their AI backend and gives you a response. And it's supposed to be this companion tool. That obviously didn't um, take off. But, Elon's talking about robots. That's going to be an AI device. Is that going to be ubiquitous? Are we going to have, you know, microwaves with built-in AI? Are we going to have, is it going to hit consumer, Internet of Things at home? Like what is going to have it? What isn't going to have it? So I like your way you're thinking with, okay, where are the hardware leaders right now? You mentioned Apple, but there could be more and could be others. So very interesting times. That being said, what do you rate the AI device bottleneck layer?
So I have this one at C tier as well. And it's C tier for the exact reasons that the software is. Like you mentioned, I don't know what the next winner is going to be. Like Tesla robots could be the best thing ever, or it could be a total pipe dream. So I feel less secure where I'm putting my money when I'm playing this layer. Now, granted, some of these names that I listed, like Apple, they have hugely successful businesses outside of AI. So like that company is going to be fine regardless. But if I'm thinking of the layer itself, that's where I start kind of I would rather be in other parts. And I want to be kind of late to the party on this one. I want to invest in a company that's like really came out with something like incredible. And I don't mind being late because then that way I feel better about investing in them.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's always a double-edged sword being an early adopter. If it works, it's great, and you pat yourself on the back because you had the thought to do it. But most of the time, it doesn't. With new technologies in those early stages. The next and final one is kind of where it all comes together, at least physically, with a presence on Earth, or at least on Earth for now, and that's the data center and then the real estate around it. As a bottleneck, what are your thoughts?
Yeah. So again, this is kind of like we're kind of near the power where when you start talking about it, and it sounds like the most boring thing
Mm-hmm.
ever. I mean, companies in here, Digital Realty, Equinix, Quanta Services. So this is literally the physical buildings, and then people renting real estate for somebody to build a warehouse at, and then use the warehouse in for data services. So this again is kind of like you're almost investing in just the box or the people that own the land that the box sits on. So it's kind of hard to kind of really get interested in it. But when you start thinking about how many of those boxes are needed, and I need somewhere to put it. And when I think about real estate, some of this land may not have been that useful before, or people wouldn't have been that interested in owning that land. Well, if I need somewhere to put a massive warehouse, all of a sudden that land becomes more valuable. And that's when those companies that own those can raise lease, et cetera. So you can kind of start seeing long term how they could benefit from this layer.
What do you rate tier rank this bottleneck layer?
So I have this one at B tier. So I think that it's kind of a more safe way, again, to play AI. And by safe, I mean like this is like you need land and you need places and the buildings to focus on. So they're almost guaranteed businesses. But then how much growth can I get really from like leasing property or like the property going up that much over time? So you can see the ceiling starts getting limited in this layer. But if I'm looking for more of a safe way to play AI, that's where I start getting more interested in finding one of these companies.
Yeah, which makes sense. And when you're tying it back to your overall portfolio, we have some great videos where you recommend good balances, good structures of not having, more than 20% of your investment into one singular stock. Any thoughts on kind of that, your investing strategy as you talk about these bottlenecks and how to, once you kind of find something you're interested in investing in, what's your guidance there?
Yeah. So again, I would not want to just YOLO go into all in on these AI companies that we're talking about. If I truly believe in AI and I've carved out a part of my portfolio that I would like to invest within AI, the next step is which bottleneck do I want to allocate my money to, or do I want to be in several of the bottlenecks? In my opinion, I want to be in several of them because we've seen as the spotlight rotates around with AI, I don't want to miss out on that next SanDisk or Micron necessarily. Like I want to have investments across several of these layers. Today, we talked about some of my favorites and where I'm seeing them in the future. But I like to be invested in a company that's kind of across each of these layers. And that's where this video series is going to start building because in the next video, I'm going to be talking about several of the top companies in each of these layers and kind of give a brief overview of my thoughts. And then finally, like I mentioned in that final video, I'm going to give you my favorite stock from each of these layers as to if I had to pick just one in each of these, which one would I go with?
Well, that's awesome. I'm looking forward to those discussions. I encourage anyone watching or listening to like and subscribe so you can see when those come out. Check out some of our other videos. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this as well. Drop a comment in the video, or if you like, you can email alex at alextalkstocks.com. Check out our website. We have some resources there. Sign up for our newsletter. Would love to have you guys join and get that. It's super easy, no strings attached, no fees, nothing charged. It's just another way Alex can communicate and share some of his ideas and thoughts with you. We'd love to have you join. And yeah, thank you, Alex, for talking stocks.
No, I mean, I hope that people can just take away some learnings of maybe some bottlenecks that you didn't know, kind of like what you just mentioned, or maybe make you think a little bit different about AI. It's way more complicated than just Nvidia and Micron.
Yeah, looking forward to it. Alex, thanks for talking stocks.
It was fun. We'll talk to you soon.
Awesome. Thank you. Ciao.